The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. It's a case with a lot of evidence, but one that has never been solved despite all the attention and years of investigation. Here's the story. It's the highest profile unsolved case in the nation. It's been the subject of many theories and investigations, none of which have resulted in a successful arrest. On December 26, 1996, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found dead in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. Her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, had reported her missing early that morning. Patsy Ramsey found a lengthy handwritten ransom note in the house, addressed to her husband, John. About 7 hours after police arrived to investigate the kidnapping, JonBenét's body was found hidden behind a latched door in the basement of the home by her father, John. And now there is renewed interest in the case and a call to re-examine the evidence, including DNA, as the search for justice for JonBenét continues. So the case hasn't been solved, but it's not like things haven't happened through the years and there haven't been suspects in this case. There have been. And Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft takes a look at some of those suspects.
It's one of the biggest stories to rock the true crime world. The 1996 murder of Colorado child beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey. It's a case that still captivates the nation and the world. Despite long-held suspicions surrounding the Ramsey family, many officials, experts, and journalists have pointed to another theory in the case, that an intruder broke into the Ramseys' household and murdered JonBenét. Early suspects for this theory included Bill McReynolds, Michael Helgoff, Randy Simons, and John Brewer Eustace. In 2006, 41-year-old teacher John Mark Carr was arrested in Thailand for the crime, but his confession was proved to be false. One man has long stood out as the possible killer, Gary Oliva. Oliva, a known sex offender, sexually assaulted a 7-year-old girl in his home state of Oregon in 1991. Months later, he attempted to strangle his mother with a telephone cord while on probation. He fled before police arrived on the scene. By 1996, Oliva was a homeless fugitive living in Boulder. According to the Ramseys' private investigators, Oliva was known to visit buildings owned by the local church that fed the homeless. Those buildings were just 10 houses down from the Ramseys' home. Detective Lou Smith, who had been hired to investigate the case, describes the moment Gary Oliva first caught his eye in a 2002 episode of CBS 48 Hours Investigates.
Many times, criminals do return to the scene, and that was on the anniversary. That puts him right there at the Ramsey house a year later.
Oliva was spotted at a candlelight vigil for JonBenét. And just days after the murder, authorities were first alerted to Oliva. Police were told about Oliva by a man named Michael Vale, someone who had known Oliva since high school. According to Vale, Oliva called him the day after JonBenét's murder and confessed to the crime. But at the time, authorities never followed up on the tip. Vale joined Court TV, where he described the 1996 call.
It was December 26th, and it was about midnight, and I get that phone call, and it's Gary's voice, and he's like, oh, I just heard, little girl, like it was the most terrible. I'm getting goosebumps just now telling you guys this, and I knew something serious had happened that night. I go, wow, he actually killed the girl, and that's when I called that number. Right then and there, I called that phone number. The police never followed up.
It wasn't until 4 years after the murder that authorities finally began investigating Gary Oliva. On December 12, 2000, Oliva was arrested for possession of a weapon by a previous offender. It was a stun gun, a weapon investigators speculate may have been used on JonBenet. He also had a photograph of JonBenet and a poem written about her. In 2002, Oliva was wanted for parole violations in Oregon, and he turned himself in to the Boulder police. After turning himself in, Gary Oliva spoke to CBS 48 Hours Investigates correspondent Aaron Moriarty.
Did you hurt or kill JonBenet Ramsey?
No. No, I didn't.
Didn't you tell your friend that you were attracted to little girls?
I don't think I want to answer that.
Okay. You were living in Boulder at the time JonBenet was killed?
Yeah.
Just down the street?
Yeah.
What he will admit to is an obsession with JonBenet.
I believe that she came to me after she was killed and revealed herself to me.
Despite the growing suspicion surrounding Oliva due to his DNA not matching the DNA found at the scene, he was ruled out as a suspect. Then, in 2016, Gary Oliva was sent to prison, this time for possessing child pornography on his phone. At the time, investigators also discovered 335 photographs related to JonBenet. 3 years later, while Oliva was still in prison, he sent that same high school friend a shocking letter. In it, Oliva confessed to killing JonBenet, stating, quote, "I never loved anyone like I did JonBenet, and yet I let her slip, and her head bashed in half, and I watched her die. It was an accident. Please believe me. She was not like the other kids." Not only did this letter serve as a confession, but many handwriting experts pointed out the similarities between Oliva's letter and the ransom note left by JonBenet's killer. In January of 2024, Oliva was released from prison after serving an 8-year sentence. Now on parole until 2027, Oliva walks the streets a free man. But the question remains, will he ever face charges in one of the nation's most infamous unsolved cases, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey?
So Gary Oliva is free. He's a free man. He's walking around. And tonight, what you're going to see and what you're going to hear is Gary Oliva. Since then, because that friend of his, Michael Vale, got together with him with a camera and recorded hours of interactions and discussions about JonBenet Ramsey. Take a look at a little bit of that.
My friend, my savior at the divine ultimate.
That would be an honor to eat God's leftovers.
Wow.
The leftovers of God.
I guess that would be.
She's God. Where is she? God. God. God.
God damn, I love you, JonBenet. Are you still filming?
I don't know. Let me see.
God damn, that pisses me off.
What?
Leave it. Don't leave it. Leave it. Just leave it going. It's okay.
He wanted everything recorded. All of these conversations. Brings us to the first question in our investigation. And it's about these videos. Why were these videos made? Joining me tonight in studio, the man who made the videos, Michael Vale, who's I guess a childhood friend is the way he would describe you. Knew Gary?
I was a classmate of
Gary
Oliva, yes.
Okay. Why would you get together with this guy, and why would you make these recordings?
Well, you know, we've been talking for years, and the thing is Gary wanted me to visit him. And I wanted to visit him because I wanted to get more information, and I wanted to find out what was going on. And also...
But why? Why do you want to know more?
Well, it's been a 28-year struggle, you know, to understand and to understand what's going on with this whole case. And, you know, receiving a phone call with a sobbing Gary Oliva, and then, you know, why did I go to Denver? Because I need, you know, I wanted to hear more.
So why do you think he wanted to do it? Why does he want to be recorded, right? He's been presumably cleared, right, in the investigation is what we heard. Why would he want to continue a conversation about JonBenet? Why would he want to talk to you? Why would he want it all recorded?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because, you know, he definitely feels that you know, she's his savior and that she's there for him, and he wants to keep her spirit alive by doing these shrines and these altars.
Did you feel safe with him?
Well, I mean...
like, you know him for years, but...
Yeah.
You're saying he's confessed to taking the life of this little girl, to you.
Well, I mean, I always watch my back, sure. I mean, absolutely.
So, you're in the room, you're making these recordings. What's going through your mind, and what's your interpretation of what you see from this man that you knew years ago and have had this sort of ongoing communication with?
You know, we had been in contact over the phone for so long, and those phone calls were monitored. Those were jail phone calls. And I wanted to be able to be face-to-face with him, to hear from the horse's mouth, to hear in his own words. And I had no idea what was going to happen, but I wanted to get more information.
So everyone watching right now is like, Michael, you seem like a regular guy. Why continue this relationship with this guy who clearly seems like he's a little bit off the wall, right? Has an obsession with children, has been convicted of crimes along those natures. So what is it? What makes you continue to communicate and return that communication, right? Because if he's calling from jail, you don't have to accept the call.
Right. Well, I'm curious. I want to know. I mean, it's been 28 years of wondering. I knew, first of all, he knows I know that, you know, he accidentally killed her. And this is difficult to talk about because, you know, he says it's an accident.
Right. So he's saying, but he called you you're saying the first night.
Before it was in the newspaper.
Before it's in the newspaper, yeah. You got that call. The communications continue. He confesses in that letter, and now you've sat down with him in this room and have recorded all this video that we're going to go through.
Okay.
Michael Vale, thank you. You're going to stay with us. Coming up next, did Gary Oliva confess?
They're not really going to cut her head off, or would they? It was just
I'm not them.
It was just a thing.
I'm not them.
I don't think it was.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Do you think that she would have had her head cut off, or was that a ruse? In the ransom note, they said...
I don't want to think about that. I don't know. I wouldn't. I couldn't do that if you're asking me. I couldn't.
She probably didn't even understand what was happening when it was happening, and couldn't comprehend.
Whatever actually happened, yeah. She's going, what the f***?
They're not really going to cut her head off, or would they? It was just.
I'm not them.
It was just a thing.
I'm not them.
I don't think it was.
There's Gary Oliva, one-time person of interest in the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, but has continued to talk about it through the years. Talk about JonBenet, talk about the murder with his high school classmate, Michael Vale. Michael Vale making that video with Gary Oliva. Let's take a look at another part of that video because there's so much in here. And as you watch it, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Let's take a look.
I think your average person thinks that somebody encountered the child, beat her up, strangled her. Jesus Christ, I just said all that. Inflicted harm. Oh my God, just such a beautiful thing. I can't. I'm sorry if there's any suspicion that I could ever or have anything. I would have already. I couldn't live with myself.
So now, in this part of the video, it seems like Gary Oliva is saying, I didn't do it, right? Which brings me to my next question in our investigation, which is, did Gary Oliva confess? Still with me, his high school classmate who made these videos, Michael Vale, and also with us, private investigator, more than 20 years of experience, has followed this case for his nonprofit, the Cold Case Coalition, Jason Jensen. Jason, great to see you. All right, so how would you answer that question? Did he confess?
He knows I know.
But how do you know?
Because I've had conversations with him, and also we were in a restaurant together, and there was nobody in the restaurant, and I didn't have any video equipment, and I said, Gary, what the bleep happened? Tell me what the bleep happened. There's nobody in this place. Just tell me. You know, I'm curious. I need to know. I need to know. And he told me I'm a blackout I'm under the bridge, blackout drunk. And I don't remember what happened. So to me, it may not have been a confession, but it was definitely not a denial.
So, Jason, what are you seeing in these videos of him when he's asked the ultimate question, which is, are you the one responsible for taking the life of this little girl?
Right, when he's finally confronted with the direct questions from Michael, Gary seems to have a reaction to it where he doesn't have a quick out-of-the-can answer. He's delayed, all of a sudden he gets emotional. You can see that he struggles with the question, and he talks about how the public perceives how the crime was committed, where he's talking about the level of violence and sadism that really is described about somebody using a garrote, rather than, as he's expressed to Michael, that it was some type of an accident, meaning that it was unintended. He did not mean to kill her.
Well, let's take a look at more of that conversation that you recorded, Michael, and I think this is the part Jason's talking about.
I've gone through many scenarios in my head. I think something happened where she fell back and hit her head. Well, I know a private investigator covered up and everybody's freaking out, paranoid. Oh God, what is the neighbors going to think? And that right there, by saying that, implies that I think mom and pop, if you will, pardon me for using that terminology, we're scheming together, like, how can we cover this up? Oh God, we know what really, you know, that seems, so I don't even.
I've got the perfect hypothetical. An intruder crept into the house, probably through an unlocked door even. However, they noticed the neighbors could see that door. So they go, we got to go out the basement window. And we're gonna. Then he waited and waited. And he had all this time, and he went through all the drawers, and he found all this stuff, and wrote a note, a ransom note, for 3 pages. And then went upstairs to get her and waited for them all to fall asleep. Oh, because they got home late that night. I don't know.
Let's finish. I want to hear some music.
She probably went and stun gunned her in bed thinking that would quiet her, but it didn't work. It made her scream out, so she needed her duct tape around her mouth.
A neighbor claims she heard a...
There you go.
...scream.
That's...
deathly scream, or something to that effect.
Probably like when you get a tased when you're asleep and suddenly you get tased. Then she was carried.
I don't want to do...
you don't want to
put
find...
myself in the mindset...
There's absolutely a change there in him.
This is a man racked with remorse, just full of grief, a tortured man.
So, Jason, he's written letters, And the letters, he seems to admit things, yet when he's on video, he's not admitting things. What should we take away from that? I mean, to me, there's an inconsistency here.
There is definitely an inconsistency. This man changes his mind based on the mood of the day, I would think, because clearly at some point where he's in custody, he's confessing to Michael that it was an accident, saying that he's responsible, and describes from his viewpoint how he perceived the crime was committed, how her death occurred. You know, he dropped her and watched her fade away, as opposed to what a pathologist may state, or what a prosecution through trained legal investigators might derive from all of the evidence. But from his perception, he said he dropped her and you know, and her life was lost. And then obviously from the totality of the ransom note and leaving her body behind, it was a failed abduction attempt, and he left her to die.
Let me ask you this. Is he under the influence here? Is he mentally ill? You've known him for years.
Well, I mean, I would say that he definitely is struggling with some mental issues here. Well, I mean, you cannot deny that. This is a man who is racked and riddled with grief. It's sad. It's very sad. I mean, he had the potential to be a talented artist. He had the potential to do so much with his life, and to see this happen, and to have this happen.
Did it change after that phone call that you got on the day that she was murdered, that JonBenet was murdered? Was he different before that, or did he change after that?
Here's the wild part of what you're saying, is that he called me crying into the phone, sobbing like I've never heard, to this day, I've never heard anybody sobbing like Gary on that 1996 phone call, okay? In these videos, when I went to Denver a couple months ago, it was December, and he's still crying. He's sobbing, and he's sad.
I saw him. He had the tissue. He's dabbing himself the whole time. Jay suggested the other part of this. You go back to the phone call. Like, that's, to me, that's the clearest piece of connection here because of the timing of it and everything else. 2024. Is there any way to get records of that phone call? Is that even possible? Do we know?
We would imagine that the Boulder police have that record there, because it's come up in conversation. The recent documentary that was released had one of the detectives that was from Colorado Springs at the time, working with Lou Smith, admitted it in the broadcast show that there was a classmate that made the call immediately following the death, and indicated that his classmate Gary Oliva did this, and to check into him, and they verified that he was residing in Boulder at the time. So he certainly had that availability in the vicinity to commit that.
Are you surprised that we're still here in 2024? I mean, 2024, and he is free, because you're convinced that he is the one responsible.
Oh yeah.
He was cleared, but you're convinced. So are you shocked that we're here?
I have to beg to differ. He wasn't cleared. The Boulder PD has said that nobody's been cleared. I'm just saying, yes. Well, he knows I know. And if you look at the totality of evidence, I mean, every single thing links right to Gary. I mean,
well, we've got more to talk about.
In his own words, it was an accident.
Right. Which would be some way to kind of make sense of it, I guess, for him, if he's responsible. Jason and Michael are staying with us. When we come back, who wrote the ransom note? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, a young girl murdered in her own home in Boulder, Colorado. A case that seemingly had lots of evidence, but now today continues to have many more questions than answers. Here's the story. On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey found an odd handwritten note. She started to read it, and quickly she was horrified. It was a ransom note for her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. She called out for her husband, John. When they didn't find her in the bedroom, they called 911. What happened over the next 7 hours was more than unusual. The home was not sealed off, and people were walking all over the crime scene in the home. Then, John Ramsey was asked to go through the house again, and that's when he found his daughter dead in the crevices of the basement. Suddenly, this case went from a kidnapping to the highest profile murder case in the country. And now, more than 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. But one man who's been connected to this case for years, Gary Oliva, was recorded on video by his high school classmate, Michael Vale, talking about the case and talking about JonBenet. Is Gary Oliva being looked at by investigators? And what exactly is his connection to JonBenet? That ransom note. This was a murder, but there was a ransom note. That's what made everything very confusing in the initial investigation and through the years. But somebody put words on paper. Let's take a look at some of it from the ransom note. And it's handwritten. Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. A little bizarre. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed. And if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Don't try to grow a brain, John. Victory. SBTC. And obviously, from the beginning, this has been a crucial key piece of evidence, which brings us to our next question in our investigation. Who wrote the ransom note? You get that answer, you get a lot more answers. But that question has not been answered yet. With me in studio, Michael Vale, who has known Gary Oliva for years and sat down in a room and recorded an interview with him, and private investigator with more than 20 years experience, followed this case for his nonprofit, the Cold Case Coalition, Jason Jensen. This ransom note is so bizarre. Just the words that are chosen here, Jason, what does it tell you about whoever wrote it? Just the phraseology of it and this we, victory, SBTC, referring to John by his first name, John Ramsey.
It's interesting because a lot of the things about the ransom note tells us a story. For instance, it shifts from a plural first person, we, to I, which makes you believe that it's a singular individual that's falsifying that they're a faction or group or something to sound more ominous than they actually are. And then when you really look at the ransom note and compare it to what actually occurred to the victim here, JonBenet, is that we see that she was sexually assaulted, which means it's not really a kidnap for ransom in the first place because there's a sexual component there.
Now, Michael, you spoke to Gary Oliva and asked him about it. Let's take a look at what he said about the ransom note.
Well, how did the ransom note get involved? Because I feel that the ransom note was written well before she was accidentally killed. I do feel she was accidentally killed, and the evidence is there.
In that case, it would be afterward.
The ransom note was written afterward? I think I don't think she was meant to be killed.
That I just presented unto you.
Right.
That would imply that an accident happened and we're like, oh, we got to cover this up. Oh, let's write a ransom note. So I guess that, therefore, I would say that it was afterward.
Whoa.
Or she was dying.
Maybe she wasn't.
I don't want to think about it. She's alive, okay?
Please.
So that's his reaction to it. Michael, you know, I look at that note and the writing of it. There's a level of creativity to the whole thing. Is he capable, his mind, Gary Oliva? How would you describe his mind and his creativity?
It's absolutely 100% Gary. It goes right back to high school. Gary communicates in movie lines and song lyrics, and that's how we communicated for many years through the mail, through cassette tapes. We'd send back and forth over a 15-year period before the '96 call. When I saw the ransom note, I go, well, this totally sounds like Gary, completely sounds like Gary. However, he was starting to use uppercase letters, and it confused me. It was this fellow, Jason Jensen, who was able to determine that he said, Mike, do you have anything pre-96? Do you have any 96? And I looked through my files, and sure enough, I found a letter from Gary in the 96 era. And there's lowercase. And we matched it to the ransom note, which is so
the writing, the physical writing, and we did this segment on the show as well about the writing opinions of experts, that there's similarities and it's consistent. You've got these drawings with you. What is the significance of these and where did they come from?
Well, Gary, you got to admit, I mean, you got to admit this guy...
This is all stuff he's done?
Yeah.
And he has sent it to you?
Well, he signed it too. That's a signature. Yeah, Gary he's been sending me artwork. I've been encouraging him to improve his life and to start doing art again, and to do art. And he's embraced that. He started doing this amazing art. I got to admit, I mean, he's a talented artist. I mean, I don't know, you got to admit. And then I'd like to show a couple more of these. These are the a couple colorized ones.
Yeah, just hold that up for a second.
And you can see how unique, it's a very unique style that he has. And these are signed at the bottom. You can definitely tell these are Gary Oliva's.
So how would you describe his mind? Is he intelligent? Is he creative? Because this note was sort of rambling, right? It's a three-page ransom note is not a normal ransom note. There's something a little strange about that.
Yes, and Gary was fascinated with movies, and these are all movie lines, really. I mean, basically, these are a lot of lines out of movies.
All right, Jason Jensen, Michael Vale, our time is done with you tonight. Part 2, you'll return tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But we've got another important thing to talk about on this program. Still to come, what does John Ramsey think of Gary Oliva?
If I could meet her father face to face, I would just look at him and go, what the f, man?
The Court TV podcast will return.
This horrible crime happened in December of 1996, and our officers responded to investigate. While I was not at Boulder Police 28 years ago, I have worked in policing for more than 20 years, and I want to assure you that our agency is committed to doing everything we can to bring justice to JonBenet and hold her killer responsible. So much of how law enforcement works has changed in the last 30 years. There are a number of things that people have pointed to throughout the years that could have been done better, and we acknowledge that is true. However, it is important to emphasize that while we cannot go back to that horrible day in 1996, our goal is to find JonBenet Ramsey's killer. Our commitment to that has never wavered.
I'll tell you what, there's a momentum right now that we haven't seen in years relative to this case, and hopefully the chief is right here, that we're going to get some movement and get an answer to the question. Now, on this program, we've been taking a look at this video that Michael Vale recorded of his classmate from years ago, Gary Oliva. Gary Oliva saying a lot of things, has sent letters through the years, etc., was on the radar relatively early on, and that brings us to one of the most important questions of our investigation. And it is, what does John Ramsey think of Gary Oliva? And joining us to answer that question is JonBenet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey. John, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I know this is never easy. It's always difficult, but you're always willing to speak, and we appreciate that. How about that? What do you think of Gary Oliva when I say that name?
Well, you know, he came to our attention early on. We were getting, we hired a private investigator fairly early on when we realized the police weren't really doing their job, in our opinion. And we were getting a lot of calls basically saying, hey, I tried to call the police, I have information, they won't call me back. And Oliva came to our attention. The district attorney called our private investigator and said, this is a pretty interesting lead. Could you please follow up on it? I don't think the police will follow up on it. And so that's how we got introduced to Gary Oliva. And frankly, the circumstantial information that was given to me at the time was pretty compelling, that this person ought to be looked at pretty hard. In fact, I made the comment to our investigator. I said, this is the guy. They said, slow down. Don't do a Boulder police on us. We don't know that yet. And that's true. It was easy to jump to a conclusion based on circumstantial information. And that's really about all I know about Gary Oliva. I assume he was DNA tested against the DNA sample, unidentified male DNA sample we have. Don't know that for a fact, but I assume that has been done. But I don't know. There's been probably half a dozen, maybe 4, 5, 6 people like him that have come to our attention that are very compelling potential suspects.
Let me ask you a follow-up question, John.
Jump to conclusion.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. That's the last thing you would ever do, because that's how we ended up where we are now. Yeah. Did you ever, as a family, go to a restaurant on Broadway Street called La Iguana? Does that sound familiar?
Not that I recall. I recognize the name, I think, but I don't remember ever being there. But that's a long time ago.
And the reason I'm asking is because Gary Oliva apparently worked there for a time as a busboy, bussing tables. And I didn't know if that would be a regular spot that you would go to. So as we sit here tonight.
No, it wouldn't be regular, no.
No? So as we sit here tonight, where do you feel the investigation is right now? Do you feel like there is a sense of momentum, that there is the renewed interest and activity that could uncover something here?
Yeah, no, there's definitely, we have more hope than we've had in a long time. 2 things have happened. One, a new police chief has been brought in from the outside, which is important. I've met with him a couple times, decent guy, very good communicator. And they purged several detectives. Citizen Review Board recommended termination, which included the detective that had our case for 25 years, and he was a roadblock, quite frankly, to any progress. So those 2 things were significant, the house cleaning and then the new leadership. And we're optimistic that that they will do the things that can be done now with the latest technology. That's what we're advocating.
So from your perspective right now, the key is going to be, you believe, technology, or are you still hopeful that someone comes forward with some information or someone makes an admission?
Yeah, I believe that the case will be solved with DNA technology. You know, Lou Smith, the legendary detective that was brought in to work on this case by the DA early on, out of retirement, told me, he said, this case will be solved by DNA, period. And that's really what I believe as well.
What's your understanding of the sourcing of the DNA? Because DNA comes from different places, right? It can be blood, bodily fluids. It can be, just touching, touch DNA. What is your understanding of the source of the DNA that has been tested or needs to be tested?
Well, there was unidentified male DNA recovered within weeks of JonBenet's murder. and that was given in a report to the police by the DNA lab. It was, I'm told, not a great sample, but it was good enough to put in the federal CODIS database. Additional testing was done in 2008, approximately, using touch DNA, I think it's called, which, you know, is much more advanced than it was in 1997. And additional samples were recovered, which were consistent with the sample recovered in 1997. What we want to happen is for testing to be done by a cutting-edge lab where the latest technology is available and put in a format that is compatible with doing the public genealogy research that's been so successful. The format that's in the CODIS database, the federal database, is not the format that can be used for the genealogy research effort. So it has to be retested, is my understanding. And that's what we would like done. We think there may be some other items that were taken from the crime scene by the police that were not tested. We don't know that for a fact, but that's the last we knew, that they had not been tested. We'd like those to be tested, as well as the items that were previously sampled early on, and to put into a format that can be used for genealogy research.
And we have about a minute left. John, have you had those conversations with any of the detectives, the chief, the cold case unit?
Well, you know, I offered to meet with the cold case unit, and they didn't invite me. But no, not directly. I've communicated via email. We have a meeting scheduled with the chief of police, and hopefully the DA will be present later in January. And we're going to really hit that hard.
Well, John Ramsey, thank you again so much for joining us.
Just ask.
You know, everyone who's watching right now is praying for that answer as well. I know we've got a little bit of a delay going on right now. So, John Ramsey, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully next time I speak to you, you've spoken with investigators out in Colorado. You know what, folks? The bottom line is this case should be solved. It was far from the perfect murder, but was even further from the perfect investigation. It was a botched scene. There was tunnel vision and a lack of new approaches that has really hindered this case from the outset. So let's hope the new chief, the new investigators can turn that around and finally deliver justice for that little girl who was murdered in her own home, taken from her bedroom. I'm Vinnie Politan. You know we'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.